House will be in order. Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., March 8, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Kevin Yoder to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 3:50 p.m. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, for 5 minutes.
Unanimous consent to revise and extend.
So approved.
Mr. Speaker, last week, as chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, I held a hearing on the problem of Medicare fraud. Now, this is not a new issue. It's been a continuing problem with Medicare. And I've been concerned about Medicare fraud from some time here. In last Congress, I introduced a bill to increase the civil and criminal penalties on those who defraud the Medicare program. In fact, in 1990, the Government Accounting Office, GAO, listed both Medicare and Medicaid as high risk because these programs are vulnerable to fraud, waste, fraud, and abuse, and mismanagement. Now, how badly mismanagement are we talking about? Well, the GAO recently issued a report about that there was $48 billion just in improper payments. Now, this isn't fraud. This is just improper payments. So when it comes to fraud, it is estimated anywhere from $60 to $90 billion lost to Medicare fraud every year. Now, during this hearing, I asked the Director of Medicare Program Integrity, whose job it is to protect Medicare against fraud and abuse, if he knew how much money is lost to fraud in Medicare. He could not answer this question. The following week, Secretary Sebelius was asked in a Health Subcommittee hearing if she knew how much money was lost to fraud in Medicare. Her answer, quote, "If we knew how big it was, hopefully we would shut it down," end quote. But in my hearing, Special Agent Omar Perez, the head of the Medicare Fraud Strike Force in the Miami region of Florida for the Office of the Inspector General, testified he was able to find $3.8 billion in Medicare fraud. My colleagues, this is one city. They've extrapolated across 50 states with almost 20,000 municipalities. You can see how we could get to $60 to $90 billion in fraud. According to the Inspector General, Medicare fraud is more lucrative than the drug trade with easy money, less violence, lighter punishments, and organized crime is taking notice and getting involved in defrauding Medicare. So here are 5 reform ideas that came out of this hearing that were mentioned to help secure Medicare against criminals engaged in defrauding the program. First, Medicare needs to maintain better control over their provider network. It's easy for a company to do business with Medicare, and the burden is on the government to remove a company from the Medicare program. This needs to change to allow the government to remove bad actors from the program quickly and efficiently. Secondly, Medicare needs to significantly improve their provider and supplier screening process. While individuals have a right to Medicare, companies do not have a right to become or stay a Medicare provider. And third, Medicare needs to shift away from the fee-for-service program. A capitated managed care organization provides a strong financial incentive to the managed care organization to eliminate fraud and abuse. It is the managed care plan that has the financial risk and not the United States federal government. When criminals perform fraud, managed care organizations present its own set of challenges, but needs to be considered when discussing reforms to eliminate fraud in Medicare. And fourth, Medicare needs to increase the role of physicians in detecting and preventing fraud themselves. Medicare providers and suppliers must use a doctor's prescription to obtain government reimbursement. Bad actors forge these documents. Previously, the GAO has recommended that Medicare require that physicians receive a statement of Medicare home health services that their patients receive so they can review the documents. This will allow them to look at it carefully and detect any potential misuse of their authorizations. And lastly, Medicare needs to use predictive computer modeling and other technologies. The credit card industry uses this modeling to identify potentially fraudulent transactions. Medicare and Medicaid should adopt this style of analysis to prevent fraudulent claims. Mr. Speaker, these are 5 simple ideas to empower the Medicare program to stop the fraud in this system, and these were recommended from the hearing we had in Oversight and Investigation. It must be stated again, there is an estimated $60 to $90 billion in fraud in Medicare every year. And of course, no one over at Health and Human Services knows how much is lost. The Secretary of Health and Human Services could not even come up with a number. And think of that. After 45 years of this program, no one knows how much fraud is in Medicare and have taken no steps to really analyze and find out. And yet we have all the baby boomers are beginning to retire, the cost of Medicare will explode, and the hidden costs will increase. My committee will forward the material from the Oversight Investigation hearing to the Health Subcommittee to start to develop legislation to address these problems with Medicare fraud. We have a $1.5 trillion deficit, and eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse is necessary to balance their budget, and we should start now.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the privilege this morning to participate in a fascinating, in-depth discussion sponsored by the National Journal and the Regents Foundation, Living Well at the End of Life, a national conversation. It was made possible by a group that, an insurance company headquartered in my hometown, Portland, Oregon, and the deep commitment that its President and CEO, Mark Gans, has to be able to make sure that families have the information and the tools they have necessary to make sure that they understand their treatment choices and that they are respected. This is an issue that goes far beyond the so-called end of life. This is key so that everybody knows their health care choices, they understand their choices, and they make their wishes known, their choices honored and respected. It is a mistake, as we have these conversations, to mistake the high cost of end of life with concerns about health care reform. When people are seriously ill, they have high health care spending, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is a natural consequence of what happens when people need more hospitalization, more intense activity. But too often, the sickest and most vulnerable have negative experiences in our complex healthcare system, which creates unnecessary strains on both the patients and the caregivers. And it's a mistake to somehow confuse this with people who are seriously terminally ill. 40% of all people who are hospitalized can't make decisions for themselves. This is a real stress on them, on families, and the ones who have been given the responsibility to try and guess what's in their best interests. I've heard countless stories about how our health care system has failed patients during these medically and emotionally complex episodes. Both colleagues on our Ways and Means Committee, when we're dealing with health care reform, friends, witnesses, have come forward time and time again with how a parent, a spouse, a friend ended up on an autopilot in the health care system, in and out of hospitals, confused by all the specialists, decisions being made around them but not with them. We can do better. We know how to do better. There are successful models of comprehensive patient-centered care that leads to better quality and greater patient satisfaction. And it's interesting that the new polling by the National Journal and the Regents Foundation makes this abundantly clear. These results affirm that health care is deeply personal and that people want to know their options, stay in control of their care, and be in a position to help their loved ones. It was, Mr. Speaker, would ask unanimous consent to enter this poll survey research in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
It indicates that 97% of Americans polled believe that it is important that patients and their families be educated about palliative care and care options available to them when they're seriously ill. Over 80% of Americans polled believe that discussions about palliative care and other treatment options should be fully covered by health insurance, including Medicare. By a more than 3-to-1 margin, people identified that their #1 goal is more important to enhance the quality of life for someone who's seriously ill rather than just simply extend life. It pointed out that as a result of some of the, I would think, bizarre conversation that has surrounded this issue, including the 2009 PolitiFacts Lie of the Year about death panels, that elected officials and political candidates, according to this survey, are actually the worst source in people's minds for information. The good news is that they trust religious leaders, health care and providers and doctors, insurance companies, and the most trusted is friends and family, which illustrates why we need to work aggressively in educating all Americans about the choices that are available to them and how those choices are respected, and it's time to start now.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Put it a little closer if you would.
That's fine.
Mr. Speaker, the pirates are back. These are not the black-beard, eye-patched, hook-for-a-hand, peg-leg kind of pirates from the Hollywood movies. The modern-day pirates are skilled, rich, violent, armed with automatic weapons, and are driven by a business that is generating up to $7 billion a year. My constituents from Texas, Bill Rouse and his wife Judy, have navigated the oceans for years. And recently, they and another group of international navigators and sailors decided that Somalia and the Somalian pirates had made the seas too dangerous to sail in that region, forcing them to transport their ships and boats by barges to safer ports. Bill said that we cannot allow a bunch of thugs to take an entire ocean away from the world. And that is exactly what these pirates are trying to do. They have taken control of parts of the ocean and are trying to mock the most powerful nations on earth, including ours. Days before the ill-fated American ship Quest left for their journey, Bill asked Scott Adam to join them in transporting their boats. Adam, the skipper, said of the Quest was circumventing the globe, and it was a lifelong quest, and they continued on their trip, although it turned out to be doomed in the Indian Ocean. Just a week after Scott Adam and 3 other Americans were captured, they were executed pirate-style after Somali pirates captured the ship the Quest. Pirates have also hijacked and kidnapped a Danish family. Bill Rouse has also met with these people on this doomed ship. This family, including small children, is now on the Somali mainland, still held hostage. Their captors have arrogantly warned that any military effort to save them will result in their immediate execution. Bill has told me of other stories about the tight-knit community of people sailing in that region from all over the world, and they have been forced off of the sea because of the pirates. There are not enough resources to respond to these constant threats, and these pirates not only kidnap, murder, and hold for ransom small boat owners, but attack freighters and other commercial vessels as well. In just 2010, Somali pirates hijacked 53 ships and held a total of 1,100 hostages for ransom. And pirate attacks have increased dramatically in recent months. Here is a drawing of the recent attacks of the pirates in the Indian Ocean. The red represents all of the pirate attacks between March of 2009 up until October of 2010. But the blue, which you see just as much of, represents the attacks by pirates in the Indian Ocean in just the last 4 months. Piracy is a growing business because nations pay the ransom. Every dollar paid in ransom is helping this pirates of the seas finance their cause, expand their reach, and their thirst is even getting greater for more bounty and loot. Despite an increased international naval presence, the Somalian pirates are getting bolder and they are getting more violent. America has been dealing with the threat of pirates since the days of our founding fathers over 200 years ago. During the youngest years of America, the Barbary States would blackmail American ships in the United States by demanding money in return for the safety of U.S. ships that crossed the Mediterranean Sea. For years, the United States and European governments paid the humiliating tribute to protect the ships. But then in 1801, the Barbary pirates felt the wrath of the United States when Thomas Jefferson sent the United States Navy and the United States Marine Corps to take care of business with the Barbary pirates. This was the most famous action of the Marines during this time, and the phrase "from the shores of Tripoli" had been immortalized in the Marine hymn. Jefferson sent a clear message to the Barbary States and their pirates: don't mess with the United States, and they didn't for 200 years. The Somalian pirates should study a little American history. If they would, they'd find out that there will be a day of reckoning that will eventually come to them and their evil ways. Thomas Jefferson destroyed them. We will see what happens now. Our Constitution gives us the authority in Article 1, Section 8 to, quote, define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas. These ocean lines are essential to American commerce and travel, and we must do everything in our power to stop the pirates off the Somalian coast. These pirates of the seas must find out that if they continue to mess with the United States, they will find themselves in deja vu of 1801. And they, like the pirates before them, will disappear in the ash heap of history. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask to be able to revise and extend my remarks and to place extraneous material in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as the Democratic co-chair of the Women's Caucus to celebrate the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. Mr. Speaker, I'm so pleased to join millions in our nation and around the world in commemorating this International Women's Day. We celebrate courageous women in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Egypt, Sudan, and elsewhere who continue to fight the good fight at great risk to their own lives in the face of being ostracized and persecuted by their families and communities for women's abilities to be included in the societies in which they live. We celebrate tremendous women here at home in the United States who have done much to advance the ability of women to work, to vote, to go to school, and to run for and hold elective office. As a woman who is able to serve in Congress today, I know that I stand on the shoulders of these women giants who have sacrificed so much in the past. But we must also recognize that much needs to be done right here in the United States. In our country, women make only 77% of the paycheck that a male would make doing the same job. And we know that even after 100 years, it is too soon to declare mission accomplished. Recent news reports in Afghanistan shows efforts in Afghanistan to pass legislation that would shut down domestic violence shelters. Turning our attention closer to home, in Haiti, we find that after the devastating earthquake, UNICEF has found that the rapes in Haiti are at an all-time high. But we've also been fixated in recent weeks by the protest and push for democracy sweeping the Middle East, and women have been leading the charge. We must also acknowledge the shameful plight of hundreds of thousands of mothers-to-be around the globe who die because of pregnancy or child-related complications. It's shameful that the simple act of childbirth remains a death sentence for hundreds of thousands of women and girls around the world. We must recommit ourselves to the Millennium Development Goal to reduce dying from pregnancy or childbirth. And last, I had the honor of attending the State Department's Women of Courage ceremony and to honor 10 women. They were Maria Bashir, a prosecutor general in Afghanistan. She handles cases on behalf of women victims of domestic abuse. Nasta Palazanka, who at age 20 has led a peaceful protest and called attention to the plight of families of political prisoners. Henrietta Ekwe Obonno from Cameroon, a political activist and publisher of Babela. She spent a lifetime advancing press freedom, human rights, good governance, and gender equality. From China, Guo Jianmei, a female lawyer, founder of Women's Law Center at Peking University, helping to create a corps of lawyers to defend public interest cases, especially affecting women and other vulnerable groups. From Cuba, Yanni Sanchez is an international following with her blog to provide insight into the life in Cuba and to expand information regarding the flow and free expression throughout Cuba. Agnes Ozolaikan, elected to the Hungarian parliament in 2010, the only female Roma member of parliament in Hungary. Jordan, Eva Abu Holloway, dedicated her career to advocating for vulnerable people of Georgia, including women at risk of becoming victims of so-called honor crimes. Kyrgyzstan, we have Rosa Otunbayeva, emerged as Central Asia's first female head of state and head of government in a traditional majority Muslim country. From Mexico, the first woman ever appointed to the position of Assistant Attorney General, Maricela Morales, a leader in bringing justice to Mexico's most dangerous and notorious criminals. And last, but certainly not least, from Pakistan, Ghulam Sugra has become her village's first female high school graduate and the first teacher at the first school for girls. Thank you so much for these women, and thanks for International Women's Day, and I yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until 4 p.m. today.
The House returns at 4 Eastern for legislative work. Members will consider 2 bills to designate dentists and veterinarians as emergency responders after a disaster. Any requested votes will be postponed until 6:30 Eastern. Tomorrow, the House meets with the Senate to hear from Australia's Prime Minister. We'll have live coverage of that joint meeting at 11 a.m. Eastern. Then the House begins debate on eliminating mortgage relief programs. Again, live House coverage resuming at 4 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN. In just a few minutes, Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood will be testifying